all children, whether they have autistic tendencies or are ADHD or have a learning challenge, love using their hands. What I noticed is that when they're using their hands, they are occupied and are often not conscious of time. And time is a bit of a tyranny for some of the autistic boys and girls that I worked with. It has been 40 years that I've worked with asking nature to do some of the teaching. And I'm interested in role modeling what we can expect as a potential from young people who are concerned and interested in nature. And many autistic young people are very concerned about nature and want to make a contribution. There is no child that can't transform. And I also have a philosophy where nobody can be left behind.
So hello everyone and welcome back to the India Autism Center podcast. This is a space where we amplify voices of awareness, innovation and inclusive thinking. Thinking that shapes the world of special education, autism, as well as accessibility. I'm your host, Sakhi Singhi, and today we're exploring what special education looks like when it's rooted in craft, in nature, and the human potential to grow. And I have the absolute honor of having Dr. Aonghus Gordon OBE, founder and co-CEO of Ruskin Mill Trust, an organization that has really pioneered practical skills therapeutic education. It's an honor to have you here, Aonghus, and welcome to this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I have my first question already ready for you, which
Wonderful.
is, you've spent decades rethinking how students with disabilities learn. And when you think of special education today, especially in relation to autism, what comes to your mind first?
I started working with children, and between 10 and 16 in the early 80s. And I discovered that they were often quite traumatized. But that wasn't diagnosed. And their habits and their expectations were also very individual. And although autism was used, not as widely as it is today, it had a rather bland concept. And I actually found it a tricky concept or a diagnosis because of the individuation that the challenges showed up. So I noticed one thing quite early on, which is that all children, whether they have autistic tendencies or are ADHD or have a learning challenge, love using their hands. And this was absolutely clear to me. So I started teaching pottery and found that not only did I have lots of interesting concentration, but I found some very skillful young people amongst them. And it was difficult to know who would be successful at throwing clay on the wheel. What I mean by that is they're centering clay and they're actually making items that could be used. What I noticed is that when they're using their hands, they are occupied and are often not conscious of time. And time is a bit of a tyranny for some of the autistic boys and girls that I worked with. They were very happy that somehow the tyranny of time, when is the bell going to go? And that wasn't about the anxiety of the bell itself, but that things would come to an end and that they needed to come to an end in a particular way so that things were finished, put away, and new things could start. So this timing element was something I built into the use of handwork and the application of handwork. It didn't take me long before I thought of and looked at other crafts that connect the hand. And one other craft was blacksmithing.
Right.
And blacksmithing tended to work with not only the ADHD, but also autistic boys in particular. It was often more difficult to find girls engaging in blacksmithing, but they did. But it was predominantly boys that actually enjoyed using the hammer, provided they weren't sound sensitive. And what I began to see again was that certain young people on the spectrum had very precise movements and could coordinate those movements. Now, what I also noticed early on, which is how the curriculum that I now operate across 17 sites in the UK, had great lawfulness. So blacksmithing had great lawfulness in the sense that timing, and this is another paradox, had to be very precise when they were making, let's say, their poker or a candlestick. So the timing of being able to hit the hot metal when it's just soft, because it's seconds, was so lawful that they soon discovered that they had to be on time.
Yeah.
And couldn't kind of think about wandering with their minds. And so this precision of timing in order to be able to hit the soft iron was also a kind of discovery for me, in that they never argued, they never discussed it, they never felt anxious about it either, because this is the only time they could hit it if they were going to be effective, when it's soft and sometimes nearly white-hot heat.
Aonghus, Ruskin Mill's educational principle is guided by a lot of what Steiner's model of education is. How were you introduced to Steiner?
So I studied, I am a teacher, trained teacher, and there was a module on Steiner, although I'd heard of Steiner before that. And I was very disappointed that in a country where there were at least 25 Steiner schools and a very progressive education system, that we were only given 25 minutes. And so I then started looking around at what contribution did Steiner methods have. And what I discovered was that there was a very deep level of compassion in Steiner's idea of child development and adolescent development. And it was highly progressive, because the system that I saw and I experienced in my teacher training and practice was one in which there was not a great understanding about child development in relationship to social contexts, intellectual expectations, never mind the emotional content. So what I discovered was that if I could understand Steiner's phasic development of childhood, I would actually have a type of legitimacy to innovate against that idea of childhood development, which is what I've done.
Yeah.
So I'm not a regular Steiner organization, but I've applied Steiner in a very dynamic and actually successful way. But I also have other ideas within Ruskin Mill as well, although Steiner's the key one. For example, John Ruskin has a contribution to make, and also other radical thinkers, particularly thinkers where they question the nature of the classroom itself.
Correct.
And autistic young people can be very intimidated by the idea of an enclosure. And that led me to even innovate some of the Rudolf Steiner ideas of classrooms too, where I found myself reading literature on deschooling itself. Not that you stop schooling or education, but that actually the context of learning for me needed to radically change if everybody was going to be able to learn.
That actually brings me to my second question, which is, how do you define the purpose of a truly meaningful special education, if I may use the word, special education program?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So Well, there are teaching laws, and I think the first one is that if you're going to ask somebody to learn, you're more likely to be successful if you pull rather than push. So how do I put an idea of development in front of a young person who's going to say yes rather than turn away or become potentially verbally abusive or feel humiliated, which are many of the experiences that they may have had in their childhood or or in their adolescent phase.
Right.
So for me, the key thing is that the teacher has to role model something. And what the teacher needs to do is to role model an invitation in which there is, as I said, no humiliation, which means that the teacher has to come forward to where the child is. Now, that is a particular issue in special education. First of all, each child is different. So the teacher has to be able to understand both the intellectual, emotional, and practical skill of the child so that there's no over expectation and there's no under expectation. So this is a high level skill of needing to understand, which means having smaller classes and having great interest in the child itself being able to achieve something that they will not necessarily know that they can do, and maybe their parents don't know, and maybe other teachers don't know. And the reason why I believe this is so important is that in the craft curriculum, you can find out what the potential of that child's ability is. So you've got to move towards the child. Don't demand that the child moves to you.
Right.
So that is one of my definitions of a good special needs-based learning.
I think this ties in really well with the next question that I'm going to ask, which is, you often say that every young person has an inherent capacity for growth. How does that belief translate into the lived experience of a classroom? You've mentioned, of course, the philosophy of not pushing but pulling into the world. But a classroom that truly supports communication, dignity, and independence. How is that possible?
So I think you're using the word classroom.
Yes.
And I might have to say to you that I'm going to call it a learning space.
Yes, perfect.
Because in a certain way, I've disestablished certain types of classrooms.
Right.
Because they don't work. And so if I said that many forms of learning in special education, but also with autism, are often better suited in the natural world. Now, one of the great advantages in the UK is that it's very mild. You know, we don't really get extremes. We don't really get hot summers or cold winters anymore. And therefore, many, many months of the year can be spent outdoors. Now, what I'm interested in is how a garden isn't just a productive opportunity, let's say for the salads at lunchtime, but actually it starts off as a maths curriculum opportunity. How do children learn? And if you give them some seeds and they have to make a straight row, and you show them how to use a dibber, which is the opening up of the soil for the seed to go into, and the child or the young person or even the adult will follow through.
Yeah.
Because it's such a productive and interesting process. And they do know that in a few days or weeks, those seeds will germinate. And so you can have many different challenges in learning, all within that bed in the garden, all inclusively working together. If the teacher knows how to differentiate different qualities of learning and engagement. So many of the successful spaces to learn can be outdoors, and even more so in craft workshops, where you can have lots of different processes, including many different requirements of entry into learning.
One of the most unique aspects of Ruskin Mill Trust is the practical skill therapeutic education. For those hearing it for the first time, Aonghus, what is PSTE? And why do land, craftwork, and biodynamic environments hold such transformative powers for students, for pretty much everyone, but more so students with disabilities?
Well, the good news is that a lot of research has been taking place on the power of nature and its health-giving properties. So it has been for nearly it has been 40 years that I've worked with asking nature to do some of the teaching. And that's not nature talking so much, but nature enveloping, embracing child and young adolescents in such a way that their senses are polished and developed. Because most learning challenges are connected to sensory challenges. And if we can polish some of those senses, for example, like the sense of balance, which is often connected to the sense of hearing. And if we can develop the sense of balance through a certain type of practical physical work, and you increase that balance, you're also working on another sense, which is hearing. And hearing is one of the base senses for communication and to be able to find your voice in the world.
Right.
So in being able to find a kinesthetic, that's a movement curriculum, in which you're working with base senses, you're also cultivating higher senses. And that method, practical skills, so moving in the world, not just without purpose, but with very clear intention, again, as I said earlier, has a kind of lawful accountability. And it's often connected to the development and polishing of those senses. So it's therapeutic insofar that the quality of experience and the engagement in nature has a particular effect on sensory coordination and wholeness. So I do use biodynamic methods, and I use biodynamic methods partly because the concept in biodynamics is that a garden or a farmstead becomes a whole entity. It's sustainable from within itself. And I'm interested in role modeling what we can expect as a potential from young people who are concerned and interested in nature. And many autistic young people are very concerned about nature and want to make a contribution. And they have some interesting ideas as well. Some of them are very practical, some of them are just not possible. But nevertheless, they're interested in the subject of how you care for nature. And so in a biodynamic method, you have a sustainable, what I'm going to call organism. It's not just plants and trees, but the insects, the entire nature, ecology itself cooperates. And the principle of cooperation is in everything that Ruskin Mill does, in that we also have to generate sound relationships that are not just thought of, but performed. So in a biodynamic ecology, you have the performance of some very skillful, high quality, visionary messages that can be given and taken up by young people on the spectrum.
So the field center of Ruskin Mill is an extraordinary research space that merges architecture, biography, craft, and and all of the senses.
Well done, you've researched.
How does this environment deepen the work done with neurodivergent students?
Very good. So it was principally built in the more iconic elements by craftsmen from Ruskin Mill College. But maybe more importantly, excuse me, it is a building that actually depicts the method. So it's a three-dimensional space in which the 7 fields of practice, of practical skills, therapeutic education, are the coordinates for the building. So in a way, there really isn't an architect, but there's the method that is the architect. And so obviously you need an architect to be able to put it all together and get permission and building control. But the building itself is an expression of the thinking in relationship to human development. For example, like in Steiner's philosophy of human integration and capacity building, there are 12 senses, not 5.
Yeah.
Well, actually, many people also have 7. Some people have more. But we've established 12 senses, and that is a coordinating principle. And in the same way that it's more or less established that there are 7 life processes that give us and sustain life, and are obviously scientifically shown as well.
Is this the riddle of humanity? Is that the one? Or
That's where he talks about it, but it's also GCSE biology,
okay.
where you study the 7 life processes.
Okay.
And without those 7 life processes, you can't have life. Now, so we've arranged those life processes in such a way that they come into part of the design. And so the building can be studied as part of the method of the trust. And so why did we build this building? Well, what's become clear is that over the many years that the trust has been working, and we've had some great successes and our reputation is well known, we discovered that really we couldn't develop a consensus about what is it that we do. And I was concerned about that because it was full of opinions, and opinions need to, in an educational organization, go from opinions into insights.
Right.
Insights then become understood, and we can extend our understanding and opportunities to children to see their potential. So the research building is to research, why does handwork generate so much cognitive capacity in children? We research that. How does care within the 7 care qualities that Ruskin Mill has developed from the life processes have such impact when they're brought together as a whole, and you bring children together around a table to eat, and that you choose biodynamic food and organic food so that they have the best opportunities to find an inner resilience because of the nutritional quality of the food. So all those elements are researched, and many, many more, up to PhD level. And the field center now houses around 10 PhDs.
That's incredible.
And all of those PhDs contribute to a validation of a method. And I have to say this, you see, I'm a potter. People don't often know this. So I work with my hands. And I had one very important inner revelation many, many, many years ago, that the clay was doing more for me than I could do to the clay. And at that point, I realized that if it was doing positive things to myself, then it's going to have great capacity to help young people finding their path. Yeah. So I turned craft work from being only an activity of service to the community, but also transformative development of people themselves, because they changed as a result of moving and developing material.
Aonghus, you've worked with learners across Europe, the US, Far East, and now India. What global practices in special education and autism support have actually impressed you or not? We have a lot of educationists who tune in to this podcast. What could we learn?
So, well, I'm learning all the time. Otherwise, I wouldn't travel around. And if I can just say a few things about the India Autism Center and its vision and ambition, and although it's not working with children, it is working with the repotential of people on the spectrum with autism. And so what I've encountered here is a very particular love of humanity. And when I travel around, I don't always see that. And I think obviously that comes out of the immense spiritual wealth and richness of the Indian culture. And it is so precious to see a spiritual movement, a spiritual process that's sustained human beings for thousands and thousands of years being translated into methods in which humanitarian impulses are going to drive personal transformation. So I'm learning from that. It's not operational yet, but I'm very clear that it will be, because I know how committed people are here. So as I travel around, I also meet some very challenging situations, and maybe I won't mention some of the countries that I've had challenges with, but there are a remarkable number of countries that still haven't signed the Human Rights Act, for example.
Yeah.
And so autistic children hardly exist as a result of that. And then it's left for parents to try and do something about it, which is a very challenging situation. And if you haven't signed the Human Rights Act, you have a real problem in helping special needs, because they've got to be made visible.
Right.
And so often those countries have quite reductive, very simplistic views about determinism.
Yeah.
And therefore don't see potential. So if you have a deterministic view that you're fixed, then, maybe you can't imagine that actually a human being can transform. So I know one thing in my 40 years of work, that there is no child that can't transform. And I also have a philosophy where nobody can be left behind. So I will do what I need to do where I'm invited.
Aonghus, thank you so much for sharing your insights, your philosophy, and the remarkable journey of Ruskin Mill Trust. We're really honored to get to learn from you, to get to learn from the Trust's journey. And honestly, you're just this wealth of information that keeps giving. And we're so, so, so honored to have you here in India at the India Autism Center.
Well, it's my pleasure too, Saki. So thank you for the interview.
Thank you. Thank you. So if you found this conversation useful, and like we mentioned with Dr. Keith, we'd be linking some resources from Ruskin Mill Trust in the description below. If you have any questions for the Trust, please do leave it in the comments. We'll hope to get it answered by folks from the Trust. And like I said, if you find this conversation meaningful, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. It helps us go a really long way to get people like Dr. Gordon in front of us. And see you next time. Until then, please consider watching any of the videos that are popping up in your screen.